Jasmine Carter, a calm yet unbreakable martial arts instructor, never imagined that one night in a quiet community center would push her from teaching self-defense to leading a movement for change. In a city still reeling from an abuse of power, Jasmine stood at the intersection of personal resilience and public responsibility. When she was approached to help retrain the very system that had once tried to silence her, the true conflict began, not between fists, but between fear and hope. Her decision would ripple far beyond the walls of her gym, inspiring a new understanding of what real strength looks like in the face of injustice. Tonight, as the city holds its breath and watches closely, one question remains. Will you find the courage to stand when the world demands your silence? Before we dive into Jasmine's incredible journey, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. The cold beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, blinding Jasmine Carter where she stood frozen on the cracked path in the middle of Ashton Park. The streetlights barely reached this corner, making the officer's light seem even harsher, more aggressive, a weapon in itself. Jasmine could feel the gravel digging into the soles of her sneakers, could hear the rustle of leaves overhead, but all her senses locked onto the man standing 20 feet away. Officer Todd Reynolds, in full uniform, squared his shoulders and raised his baton higher, the metallic glint unmistakable even in the dim light. His posture was not defensive. It was offensive, the body language of someone ready to dominate. Jasmine's breathing slowed, controlled, just the way she had trained herself through years of martial arts. She knew better than to show fear, knew better than to react first. Her body remained still, her hands relaxed at her sides. Her instincts screamed caution. Todd's eyes, narrow and unblinking, locked onto her with a mixture of suspicion and something more volatile, the hunger for control. Every nerve in Jasmine's body tensed, but not out of panic, out of preparation. She had faced aggression before, on mats and in alleys, but the weight of the badge he wore shifted the rules of engagement. The silence between them thickened, stretched to the breaking point. Todd took a half step closer, baton tilting slightly forward, a clear warning. Jasmine did not flinch. She did not run. The concrete beneath her feet felt suddenly unstable, the way a cliff edge crumbles right before the fall. She saw his right hand twitch, the subtle repositioning of his grip on the baton, the micro-expressions in his jaw tightening, the way his boots creaked against the ground. Every detail painted the same picture. This encounter was about to explode. Behind Todd, the park was a black sea of empty benches and silent trees. No help would come from there. In the distance, traffic hummed along Ashton Boulevard. A world away from this patch of confrontation, Jasmine shifted her weight subtly onto the balls of her feet, making herself lighter, faster, without moving enough to provoke him. She kept her breathing steady, heart hammering against her ribs like a war drum, preparing for the inevitable collision. Todd's voice finally broke the oppressive silence, sharp and full of authority, stripped bare of professionalism. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, baton dipping as if ready to strike if she hesitated. Jasmine slowly lifted her hands halfway, enough to signal compliance without surrendering entirely. Her mind raced, calculating angles, distances, timing. She could see it clearly now. The decision had already been made. Todd was not here to investigate or assist. He was here to dominate, to force submission, and he had chosen his target poorly. The flashlight stayed locked onto her face, disorienting, keeping her blinded while he advanced a taller step. Jasmine refused to move backward. Giving ground would invite more aggression. She had been in enough confrontations to understand the predators who needed that space, who fed off it. Her refusal to retreat seemed to infuriate him further. His knuckles whitened around the baton, and Jasmine noted the way his shoulders squared more tightly, his chin jutting forward, every inch of him broadcasting imminent violence. In the background, the faint sound of sneakers scuffing against the pavement echoed from somewhere deeper in the park. A jogger, perhaps, or maybe more than one. Jasmine filed that away. Witnesses could change everything, or nothing, depending on how fast this escalated. Todd shifted his weight, his knees bending slightly, a prelude to action. The baton rose higher, gleaming under the flashlight's beam. Jasmine's muscles coiled, ready but not yet moving. She was not going to be the one to escalate this. If violence came, it would be on his hands first. Her eyes locked onto his, steady, unflinching, forcing him to see her not as a target, but as a person. A calculation he clearly resented being forced to make. Another step. The baton twitched in his grip, almost like a fencer's feint, testing her reaction. Jasmine did not bite. Todd's mouth curled into something that was not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. He was used to fear. He was used to panic. He was used to people who buckled when threatened with force. Jasmine's composure only fed his frustration, a feedback loop tightening around his own loss of control. The longer they stood there, locked in that silent standoff, the more inevitable the clash became. Jasmine felt it building, the energy in the air crackling with anticipation. She read his breathing patterns, the flex of his shoulders, the twitch of his baton hand, all signs of a man on the brink of committing himself to violence. If he swung, she would defend herself. Not attack, not provoke, defend. But defense, she knew too well, could look like resistance to someone who had already decided she was guilty. Every choice carried weight now. Every second counted. There was no law protecting her in that moment, only her skills, her instincts, her resolve. The flashlight jittered slightly as Todd adjusted his grip again, nerves betraying him. He licked his lips, narrowed his eyes, measured her like a target on a range. Jasmine could almost feel the seconds ticking by like a metronome, the beat of danger growing louder, faster. She tightened her core muscles, subtle, invisible, readying her stance. She would not strike first. She would not give him that narrative, but she would not go down. Not tonight. Not like this. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them, approaching fast now. Jasmine caught to the flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, but dared not look away from Todd. Distraction would be fatal. She had to trust that whatever was coming would not strike her in the back while she focused on the threat in front of her. Todd barked again, harsher, louder, as if he could force obedience through volume alone. "Hands on your head now!" Jasmine did not move. Her hands remained where they were, open, visible, non-threatening. The refusal was silent but absolute. Todd's nostrils flared. His baton shifted back an inch. He was winding up. Jasmine inhaled once, sharply, setting her body into motion even before the blow came. But just a few hours earlier, everything had been very different. The fluorescent lights inside the Ashton Community Center flickered slightly overhead as Jasmine Carter wrapped up the final minutes of her self-defense class. A dozen women, ranging from teenagers to middle-aged professionals, stood in a semicircle, still breathing heavily from the last drill. Jasmine offered a few encouraging words, reminding them to trust their instincts, to stay aware, to carry themselves with confidence. She adjusted her tone to something lighter, letting the class end on a positive note despite the intensity of their training. The women laughed, some shaking out their tired limbs, others pulling hoodies over their sweat-soaked shirts. As the group began to disperse, Jasmine moved methodically around the gym, gathering scattered training pads and boxing gloves. Her muscles ached pleasantly, the satisfying fatigue of a session well taught. She slipped the last set of sparring mitts into a battered equipment bin and clicked the lid shut with finality. For a brief moment, she allowed herself a small smile. Nights like these grounded her. Teaching wasn't just about physical skills. It was about planting seeds of resilience, giving people tools to carve out a sliver of safety in an often unpredictable world. Several students approached her, offering quick thank yous before heading into the crisp evening. Jasmine responded with warm nods, watching as the last of them disappeared through the main doors. Alone now, she crossed the polished hardwood floor to the double set of glass exits, her sneakers squeaking faintly. She reached up and flipped the main lights off, plunging the large room into semi-darkness. Only the emergency strips along the walls remained glowing, casting thin lines of soft illumination across the floor. Outside, the streetlights buzzed against the night sky, staining the sidewalk with puddles of muted gold. Jasmine slid her gym bag onto her shoulder, her hand automatically checking the zippers. Habit. She swung the heavy door open, stepped into the chilled air, and immediately turned to lock up. The key clicked into the deadbolt without resistance, and she gave the handle a sharp tug to confirm it was secure. Satisfied, she turned to head down the steps toward the sidewalk when something prickled at the back of her mind, a tiny detail out of place. She hesitated, glancing up instinctively toward the corner of the building where the community center's security camera should have been mounted. It was there, exactly where she remembered it, the small black dome aimed toward the parking lot entrance. But the soft red recording light that usually blinked steadily was dark. Jasmine frowned, stepping back up onto the last stair to get a better look. No light, no sign of life from the camera at all. She tilted her head slightly, running through possibilities. A dead battery? Power outage? It seemed unlikely. The emergency lights inside were functioning normally, and the exterior lampposts along the center's perimeter hummed with steady electricity. Her instincts sharpened, the same way they did during sparring matches when an opponent's movements telegraphed an unexpected attack. Something was wrong. She felt it, not in the pit of her stomach, but higher, near her lungs, a tightening that made every breath just a little shorter. Still, nothing else around her seemed immediately threatening. The sidewalk was empty. The lot held only a handful of vehicles, none of which showed any obvious signs of occupancy. She scanned the street with a practiced eye. A city bus rumbled past a block away, its interior lights glowing dimly behind scratched windows. Across the street, the windows of a laundromat shone with fluorescent fatigue. The lone attendant, visible behind the counter, hunched over a phone. No one watched her openly. No engines idled. No silhouettes lurked. Still, Jasmine trusted her instincts more than her eyes. She adjusted the strap of her gym bag, shifting the weight closer to her body, and took a deliberate step forward. If there was a problem, she would meet it head on. If this was nothing, she would file it away in the back of her mind, just another note of caution. She moved briskly toward the crosswalk at the end of the block, her sneakers barely making a sound against the cracked concrete. Passing under one of the taller lamp posts, she resisted the urge to look back at the darkened camera. Eyes forward, shoulders square, walk with purpose. The lessons she had taught a dozen times tonight applied just as much to herself now. The air smelled faintly of exhaust and damp earth, a reminder that fall had begun to settle into Ashton City. Jasmine reached the crosswalk, pressed the worn button on the pole, and waited as the traffic light cycled through its mechanical ritual. Across the street, beyond the laundromat, the faint outline of Ashton Park loomed, its treetops whispering in the night breeze. She crossed when the signal changed, cutting diagonally across the intersection to the edge of the park. Her road home was faster this way, a shortcut she had taken dozens of times without incident. The path snaked along a narrow strip of grass bordered by iron fencing, eventually opening into the main green space of the park itself. Tonight, though, the dark seemed heavier, thicker, as if it pressed against her skin with invisible hands. Jasmine kept moving, her senses tuned to the rhythm of her own breathing, the distant hum of traffic, the irregular chirp of insects hidden in the hedges. She passed a low wooden bench where someone had left a crumpled newspaper, fluttering weakly in the breeze. A street lamp buzzed overhead, casting long, crooked shadows across the asphalt path. Halfway down the block, she caught the faint glint of headlights swinging wide around a distant corner. For a moment, the light bathed the sidewalk ahead in stark white before disappearing as quickly as it came. She tightened her grip on her bag without breaking stride. Nothing in her training had ever suggested paranoia was wise, but she had learned over the years that vigilance was survival. Tonight, something about the dead camera, the empty streets, and the restless feeling in her chest whispered that vigilance might not be enough, unaware that someone was already silently watching her. As Jasmine Carter reached the first curve in the sidewalk that bordered Ashton Park, her gaze drifted instinctively toward the small lot that sat adjacent to the community center. The parking lot, usually deserted this late at night, looked as it always did: cracked asphalt, faded lines barely visible under weak overhead lamps. A few cars remained, scattered like forgotten toys: a battered sedan, an aging minivan, a delivery truck with its logo peeling at the corners. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound beyond the distant whisper of leaves rustling against one another. She was halfway past the entrance when she saw it. A squad car. It emerged from behind the shadow of the building, its headlights cutting two sharp beams through the darkness. The sudden appearance made her slow instinctively. The car rolled forward at a measured pace. No sirens, no urgency, just a slow, deliberate crawl as if surveying the area. The roof-mounted emergency lights flashed once, briefly, a single pulse of red and blue, then cut off. Jasmine frowned. The gesture, too quick, too deliberate to be an accident. It was not a full activation, not the kind required for an emergency. It felt more like a signal, or a warning. The car turned slightly, sweeping the narrow lot with its beams before easing back into the shadows near the fence that separated the lot from the edge of the park. The driver's window remained up. Jasmine could not make out the face behind the wheel. She shifted her gym bag higher on her shoulder and kept moving without altering her stride. If she slowed, if she hesitated, it would draw attention. She had learned long ago that predators, whether obvious or subtle, responded to the energy you projected. Fear attracted attention. Confidence discouraged it. Still, her instincts buzzed like an angry wasp trapped beneath her skin. Every part of the encounter felt wrong. Officers on routine patrols did not flash their lights without reason. They did not idle silently in the shadows. A cold weight settled low in her gut, heavier than any fear. It was the weight of understanding. Someone had taken an interest in her, and whoever it was had no intention of identifying themselves openly. She passed the mouth of the parking lot without looking directly at the car. Her peripheral vision caught a slight twitch of movement, perhaps the shifting of a figure inside the driver's seat, but she kept her eyes fixed on the sidewalk ahead. The park stretched out before her, open and empty, with winding paths disappearing into clusters of trees and low bushes. She could double back toward the busier main roads, but it would add another 15 minutes to her walk, a prospect she weighed carefully against the risk of being boxed in by an unknown figure. The patrol car remained still. Jasmine could feel its presence at her back, silent, patient. A hunter waiting for the right moment. At the far end of the block, a streetlight sputtered and blinked, plunging a stretch of sidewalk into semi-darkness. Jasmine noted it without breaking stride, adjusting her course slightly to remain under what little illumination remained. She kept her breathing even, her posture loose but alert. Her gym bag shifted slightly against her hip, the contents shifting: training gloves, a towel, 2 wooden practice knives, harmless objects, but ones that, under the wrong interpretation, could be twisted into something sinister. The squad car did not move, but the feeling that it could at any moment stalked her steps. She turned right at the next intersection, following the outer boundary of Ashton Park. The narrow path curved ahead, flanked on one side by a low iron fence and on the other by a strip of struggling hedges. Beyond the fence, the park was a patchwork of light and shadow, trees swaying gently in the autumn breeze. Jasmine kept close to the edge of the sidewalk, giving herself room to maneuver if necessary. She checked the lot once more out of the corner of her eye. The patrol car was gone. No engine sound, no tire screech, just gone, melted back into the night like it had never been there. A hollow feeling unfurled in her chest. She resisted the urge to stop, to scan the area, to betray the unease now clawing at the back of her mind. Instead, she moved faster. Not enough to look suspicious, but enough to close the distance toward the better-lit sections of the park. Her heart knocked once, hard, against her ribs. She slowed her breathing, calming her body the way she would before a fight. The squad car's disappearance raised more questions than it answered. Had it left? Was it circling, waiting somewhere ahead? Every training session, every lecture she had ever given about situational awareness pressed against her skull. She could not afford distraction. Not now. The sidewalk split ahead, one branch curling into the darker center of the park, the other hugging the fence line toward the busier streets. Jasmine hesitated for a fraction of a second, weighing the options before veering right. Better to stay exposed under the streetlights than to vanish into the tree line where shadows offered cover, not just for her, but for whoever might be following. Footsteps echoed faintly across the pavement, her own steady and measured, but she could not shake the feeling of being watched. It was not a sound. It was not a movement. It was something deeper, something primal. She crossed under a leaning lamppost, its yellow light flickering weakly, and pushed forward without breaking stride. A bus groaned past on the distant boulevard, headlights casting brief, sweeping arcs through the gaps between buildings. Jasmine caught a quick reflection in a car window parked along the curb. Her silhouette, small but composed, gym bag slung tight to her side. No one else in sight. No immediate threat she could see. Yet, every instinct inside her screamed that something unseen coiled nearby, waiting. The community center was now several blocks behind her. The familiar safety of walls, locks, and known exits felt impossibly distant. She was alone, exposed, but she was not helpless. Jasmine kept moving, each step precise, deliberate. Fear whispered at the edges of her mind, but she refused to let it seep into her muscles. She had trained for moments like this, not for victory, not for glory, but for survival. Jasmine decided to walk home, more cautious than usual. Officer Todd Reynolds adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, letting the patrol car roll slowly to a stop just beyond the edge of the community center's parking lot. He kept the headlights off now, relying on the faint glow of the street lamps to watch the figure ahead. She moved with purpose, cutting across the intersection and heading toward the main path that wound through Ashton Park. His eyes narrowed, tracing the easy, confident swing of her arms, the gym bag slung casually across one shoulder. Alone. No witnesses close enough to interfere, no backup to second-guess his instincts. Todd shifted in his seat, the vinyl creaking beneath him, irritation prickling just under his skin. He hated nights like this, the kind when every frustration, every perceived insult, every minor authority he thought he possessed felt laughably small against the world outside the thin walls of his cruiser. He had not set out looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of presenting itself, and he had learned not to ignore such opportunities when they arose. From this distance, he could see just enough to feel suspicious. Athletic gear, confident walk, alone in a park after dark. He built the story in his head quickly, efficiently, the way a fire builds in dry brush. Drugs, maybe. Stolen goods. Trouble, certainly. It did not matter that she looked composed, that she walked with the surety of someone who belonged. It only mattered that she was there, moving through his city without fear, without permission. It only mattered that she fit the profile he had internalized long before he ever wore a badge. Todd leaned back, one hand drifting lazily to the radio mounted near his dashboard, but he did not pick it up. He did not call anything in. This was not about following procedure. This was about exerting the control he felt slipping through his fingers with every passing year on the force. It was about reminding someone, anyone, that he still held authority, that he could still command obedience when the mood struck him. He watched as she turned onto the main path cutting through the park, moving deeper into the web of winding trails and scattered benches. Her pace did not quicken. She did not glance over her shoulder. That casual indifference ignited something hot and reckless in Todd's chest. He popped the door open and stepped out, boots crunching lightly against the gravel shoulder. He left the car, parked under a broken streetlight, half hidden by the skeletal remains of a willow tree. The night air hit him like a slap, sharp and biting, but he barely registered it. His focus narrowed to the figure ahead, oblivious to his presence, gliding along the sidewalk with the easy confidence he found so infuriating. He slipped a hand down to adjust the baton at his hip, feeling its reassuring weight. Not because he needed it. He had no concrete reason to think she was dangerous, but because it made him feel ready, because it symbolized power. Keeping to the deeper shadows, Todd followed at a measured distance. Years on the beat had taught him how to move quietly when he wanted to. His uniform's synthetic fibers whispered against his body, the Velcro closures on his vest pulling ever so slightly with each breath. The world shrank around him, blocking out the city noises, the distant rumble of passing cars, the faint howl of wind threading through the trees. Only the sound of her footsteps mattered now, a steady rhythm on the path ahead. He studied her closely, no visible weapon, no slouched gait that suggested intoxication, no frantic glances or sudden movements that betrayed guilt. But none of that mattered. He saw what he wanted to see, an anomaly, a threat, a target, someone whose existence in his domain after dark needed to be challenged. Todd's mind raced ahead, imagining how the confrontation would unfold. He would demand identification. He would find a reason to detain her. Non-compliance would justify escalation. If she resisted, if she questioned him, he would make sure the encounter ended the way he decided it should. He was the authority here. His badge was the law tonight. Ahead, the path curved left, veering closer to the tree line. She followed it without hesitation, disappearing briefly behind a thick cluster of oaks before re-emerging under the pale beam of another streetlight. Todd picked up his pace slightly, closing the gap between them, close enough now to see the braid in her hair, the smooth set of her shoulders, the deliberate strength in every stride. He hated the way she carried herself, hated the way she moved like she owned the ground she walked on, hated that she made him feel invisible when he had spent his career demanding to be seen, to be respected, to be obeyed. A brittle smile cracked across his face as he tightened his fingers around the strap of his baton. The timing was perfect. The path ahead veered into a darker section of the park where trees clustered thickly and the weak city lights barely penetrated. There would be no bystanders here, no cell phones raised in judgment, no oversight. He slowed his steps, letting her pull a few more yards ahead, giving himself just enough distance to approach on his own terms. The thrill of it built inside him, a sick kind of anticipation he refused to name. Tonight, he told himself, he would remind someone what it meant to be challenged. He flexed his hands once, twice, shaking out the tension. The baton hung ready at his side, the weight of his belt pressing reassuringly against his hips, every muscle in his body aligned to a single intent. She passed beneath a flickering lamp-post, her shadow stretching long and thin across the cracked pavement. Todd watched her step over a fallen branch without breaking stride. He felt a sharp satisfaction knowing she had no idea he was so close, that in mere seconds he could close the gap, step into her world, and disrupt it completely. The decision crystallized, sharp and unstoppable. He decided to make his move. Todd Reynolds closed the final few feet of distance with deliberate steps, his boots crunching lightly over loose gravel scattered along the edges of the path. He slowed only when he reached a point where his flashlight could fully cut across Jasmine Carter's path. Without a word, he snapped the beam upward, catching her directly in its harsh circle of light. She froze mid-step, blinking against the sudden intrusion. Her body language tightened, instinctual and sharp, but she did not retreat. Todd held the light steady on her, savoring the momentary disruption, the assertion of authority it gave him. He shifted his stance, legs slightly apart, baton loose but visible at his side. "Stop right there," he ordered, voice loud enough to echo faintly through the quiet park. The wind rustled in the trees above, but otherwise the night held its breath. Jasmine lowered her gym bag slowly to her side, her free hand remaining relaxed and empty. She turned to fully face him, her expression unreadable under the flashlight's aggressive glare. Todd took a few steps closer, narrowing the gap to a few feet. From here, he could see her features more clearly, composed, focused, not intimidated the way he expected. It irked him immediately. He tilted his chin up slightly, trying to reclaim the feeling of control that her steady gaze threatened to undermine. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his tone carrying the edge of accusation rather than inquiry. His voice filled the empty space between them, too loud for the stillness of the night, but Todd did not lower it. He wanted the confrontation to feel heavy, uncomfortable. "Walking home," Jasmine answered, her voice steady but measured. "Nothing unusual about that." Todd shifted the flashlight slightly, angling it so that it continued to partially blind her while giving him a clearer view of her hands and bag. His gaze dropped briefly to the duffel. Suspicious, he thought, though he could not articulate why. There was nothing illegal about carrying a gym bag. Still, it was enough for him to decide it required inspection. "Pretty late to be strolling through the park, don't you think?" he asked, circling her slowly, the beam of light sweeping up and down as if expecting to uncover some hidden threat. Jasmine pivoted slightly, ensuring she faced him without backing away, her posture calm but alert. "It is a public space," she said, her tone even, "and the law doesn't set a curfew here." Her composure grated on him more than any insult could have. Todd stepped closer again, closing into a space where civilians usually flinched, yielding to the aggressive invasion. Jasmine did not budge. "What's in the bag?" he pressed, his voice sharp. Jasmine's fingers flexed lightly on the strap. "Training gear," she said. "I teach self-defense at the community center." Todd snorted under his breath, a derisive sound meant to show his disbelief. "Self-defense, huh? Mind opening it up for me?" The request came out as an order. No warrant, no probable cause, just pure expectation of obedience. Todd rocked slightly on his heels, waiting, the tension between them growing thick enough to choke on. Jasmine paused, just a fraction of a second longer than someone eager to comply would have. It was not defiance. It was assessment. Todd recognized it, and it infuriated him even more than if she had simply refused outright. Slowly, deliberately, Jasmine set the bag down and unzipped it. The flap opened to reveal a towel, a pair of worn sparring gloves, and 2 wooden practice knives, dulled from heavy use. Harmless, legal, undeniably innocent. Todd stepped forward, nudging the bag lightly with the toe of his boot. "What are these?" he asked, already knowing the answer, but unwilling to let the situation deflate without a fight. "Training weapons," Jasmine said, "for demonstrations." He straightened up, flashlight still trained on her. "You expect me to believe that?" Jasmine's eyebrows lifted slightly, the only indication of the frustration she kept tightly leashed. "You're free to believe whatever you want, officer. That's the truth." The coolness in her voice burned hotter than any shouted protest would have. Todd clenched his jaw, feeling the loss of narrative slip through his fingers. He needed her off balance, compliant, not standing her ground with quiet dignity. He took a step closer, deliberately invading her space now. "I don't think you understand the situation," he said, voice lowering into something more dangerous. "When a cop asks you questions, you answer. When a cop tells you to do something, you do it. Understood?" Jasmine met his stare without blinking. "I've answered your questions," she said firmly. "I have nothing to hide." Her refusal to cower stoked the fire already burning in his gut. Todd lifted the flashlight slightly higher, its beam now glaring directly into her eyes. Jasmine squinted, but did not look away. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. The park stretched silent around them, a forgotten piece of the city where rules blurred and power plays flourished unchecked. Todd's breathing deepened, shoulders stiffening as his mind wrestled with the fact that he was not in control of this interaction in the way he had anticipated. The baton at his hip seemed heavier now, a tempting reassurance of the authority he so badly wanted to reassert. His fingers twitched once near the handle before he curled them back into a loose fist. Behind them, far off, a car door slammed shut. Somewhere, a dog barked, breaking the unnatural stillness. Jasmine remained poised, her silhouette unwavering against the darkness beyond the beam of light. Todd stepped even closer, the gap between them now little more than a foot. "I'm not done with you," he said, low and threatening. Jasmine responded calmly, but the sense of danger grew. The yellow glow from the nearest street lamp washed over Jasmine Carter and Officer Todd Reynolds, casting long, twisted shadows across the cracked pavement. The faint buzzing of the bulb filled the silence between them, a low, constant hum that felt unnervingly loud in the otherwise still night. Jasmine shifted slightly, positioning her body so that her gym bag remained firmly between them without appearing defensive. Her breathing remained steady, her face neutral, but her mind calculated possibilities with ruthless efficiency. Todd tilted his head, the harsh light from his flashlight still trained squarely on her face. His expression tightened, his jaw setting into a hard line. He had not gotten the submission he wanted, and it gnawed at him visibly. Stepping closer, he barked out another order, his voice rising sharply against the quiet backdrop of the park. "Open the bag," he said, motioning toward it with an impatient jerk of his baton hand. "I want to see everything." Jasmine did not flinch. She had already unzipped the bag partially moments earlier, displaying its contents clearly. Training gloves, towel, practice knives. There was no ambiguity, no probable cause, nothing illegal or suspicious. Yet he persisted, and the way he said it, the tone dripping with expectation rather than legal authority, confirmed what she already knew. This was not about procedure. This was about dominance. She kept her hands visible, low at her sides, not giving him any excuse to claim a perceived threat. "I have already shown you what's inside," she said evenly, her voice a careful balance of respect and assertion. "There is nothing illegal here." Todd's face darkened, the flush of anger rising from his collar to his ears. He took another step forward, closing the gap even further until she could see the fine tremor in his hand holding the flashlight. "I said open it completely," he snapped. "Take everything out. Now." Jasmine inhaled slowly through her nose, her mind racing. There was no legitimate basis for his demand. He had no warrant, no reasonable suspicion beyond the color of her skin and the fact that she refused to be cowed. If she complied fully, she risked legitimizing an illegal search. If she refused, she risked escalation. Above them, the streetlight flickered once before settling back into its dull, sputtering glow. Jasmine glanced briefly at the path behind Todd. No witnesses close enough yet. No one to hear if his anger tipped into violence. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from calculation. Todd's stance shifted subtly, weight leaning forward, baton swinging slightly at his side like a pendulum of threat. "You hiding something?" he asked, his voice dropping to a mockingly casual tone that barely disguised the tension underneath. "Because if you're clean, you got nothing to worry about, right?" Jasmine recognized the trap immediately. It was the classic coercion. Frame any assertion of rights as an admission of guilt. She could hear the echoes of 1,000 similar encounters, layered over decades. The same tired justifications wrapped in the pretense of law and order. Keeping her tone measured, she replied, "Officer, I have cooperated. I have answered your questions. I have shown you the contents of my bag. I have done nothing wrong." The muscles in Todd's jaw flexed visibly, the tight strain of someone unused to hearing no. His flashlight beam wavered slightly, then snapped back into focus on her face. "You don't get to decide when this is over," he growled. "I do. Open the bag. Take everything out, piece by piece." The demand hung between them, heavy and oppressive. Jasmine stood still, the seconds stretching longer with each heartbeat. Compliance would buy her temporary safety, perhaps, but it would also teach this man that he could violate rights without consequence. Refusal could provoke immediate retaliation. Here, alone, in the shadows of the park, a car rumbled past a block away, its headlights briefly illuminating the tops of the trees before disappearing. Jasmine weighed her options carefully. She thought about the women she had just finished teaching, about the lesson she drilled into them. Stay calm, stay smart, survive the moment, fight the battles that mattered. Todd shifted again, his impatience clear. His baton lifted slightly, not overtly threatening yet, but enough to underline the choice he was forcing her to make. Jasmine looked him squarely in the eye. "Is there a reason you believe I'm carrying something illegal?" she asked, voice steady, unwavering. "Or are you just hoping if you push hard enough, I'll give you an excuse to escalate?" Todd's eyes narrowed to slits. "Watch your tone," he warned, but the words lacked weight. They sounded brittle, desperate. For a moment, a dangerous silence enveloped them. Todd's breathing grew louder, harsher. Jasmine felt the air between them thicken, the crackle of imminent confrontation vibrating just beneath the surface. She exhaled, slowly, grounding herself. She could not win by force. She could only survive by being smarter, calmer, more disciplined than the man trying to provoke her. Without breaking eye contact, she reached down and pulled the towel fully from the bag, followed by the gloves and the practice knives, placing them one by one on the ground at her feet with deliberate care. Her movements were slow, controlled, offering no sudden motion, no excuse, nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, only the truth laid bare beneath the grimy light. Todd stared at the objects, the frown deepening on his face. For a second, he looked almost confused, as if reality refused to conform to the narrative he had already written in his mind. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then took a full step back, his baton lowering slightly. Jasmine straightened, bag empty, hands still open and visible. She did not speak. She did not offer explanations or apologies. She had met his unreasonable demand, but on her terms, without surrendering an inch of her dignity. The yellow streetlight overhead flickered again, casting strange shifting patterns across the ground. Todd's lips twisted into a sneer, the tension in his body unresolved. His next move was unpredictable. Jasmine remained perfectly still, ready for whatever would come next. She was forced to make a difficult choice. The path narrowed between the tall rows of trees, their trunks casting long skeletal shadows across the cracked pavement. Officer Todd Reynolds shifted his weight restlessly, the dim park lights throwing harsh lines across his face. His hand hovered near his baton, fingers brushing against the grip as he stared at Jasmine Carter. She stood calmly a few steps away, her empty gym bag at her feet, her hands loose and visible. There was no threat, no sudden movements, no escalation from her side, but that only fueled the irritation boiling in Todd's chest. He could not shake the growing sense that he was losing control of the situation. It gnawed at him, feeding the resentment that had been simmering all night. He was the authority here. He was the one in uniform. Yet somehow, this woman stood there with the audacity to meet his gaze without fear, without submission. His grip tightened. His heart hammered against his ribs in a rhythm that demanded action. The tension around them coiled tighter with every second that passed. The trees seemed to lean inward, the night pressing down heavier, the cold air biting at his exposed skin. Todd's nostrils flared as he breathed hard, struggling to maintain the facade of command, but every inch of Jasmine's composure scraped against his nerves like sandpaper. Without thinking, without issuing another warning, Todd's hand snapped to his belt. In one smooth, practiced motion, he unclipped the baton from his holster and drew it with a sharp, metallic hiss. The collapsible steel rod extended fully with a flick of his wrist, a sharp, unmistakable sound that shattered the fragile quiet between them. He raised the baton slightly, not swinging yet, just holding it in front of him as an extension of his authority, a promise of force. The flashlight, now tucked awkwardly under his arm, spilled uneven light across the path, throwing distorted shadows that made his silhouette appear larger, more threatening. "Last chance," Todd said, his voice low and gravelly. "You want to keep pushing, you're going to find out just how bad it can get." Jasmine did not react, no flinch, no backing away. She simply watched him, her posture unchanged, her face unreadable in the half-light. That simple act of standing her ground, of refusing to cower, sent a fresh wave of anger surging through Todd's veins. He took a step closer, brandishing the baton with a slight arc, just enough to hint at its intended use. The lamplight flickered again above them, and for a moment, the entire scene seemed to tilt, suspended between two possible futures, one where restraint prevailed and one where violence took over. Todd knew which one he preferred. He was tired of restraint. He was tired of pretending. "You think you're smart," he sneered, baton twitching in his hand. "You think you can mouth off to a cop and just walk away?" Jasmine's silence pressed against him harder than any insult could have. She did not rise to his bait, did not offer him the excuse he craved. The calmness in her presence was a mirror held up to his rage, showing him for what he was in that moment. It enraged him further. Todd shifted his stance, planting his boots wider apart, baton still raised between them. His breathing was heavier now, misting in the cold air. His mind raced, searching for a justification strong enough to justify what he wanted to do, but finding none, only the raw pulse of anger that demanded release. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, rustling leaves along the ground, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and decaying foliage. The sound masked the faint hum of distant traffic, isolating them further from the outside world. It felt like the park had shrunk, trapping them in this narrow corridor of confrontation. Todd's eyes flicked to the empty gym bag, then back to Jasmine's steady face. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to stand down, to de-escalate, to step back before the situation spiraled beyond control. But those voices were faint, drowned out by the louder, angrier ones stoked by years of buried resentment and unchecked entitlement. He tightened his grip on the baton, the knuckles of his right hand bleaching white. Another step forward, closing the gap to less than 2 feet. Jasmine remained still, her breathing measured, her eyes locked onto his. In that gaze he saw no fear, only a silent refusal to surrender her dignity. The realization stung deeper than he expected. It drove him past reason, into a place where only the immediate satisfaction of dominance could soothe the burning inside him. He jerked the baton slightly higher, shifting his weight forward onto the balls of his feet, preparing to strike if necessary. A warning blow, he told himself, a lesson, something she would not soon forget. In the flickering, uncertain light of the park, Todd Reynolds stood poised on the razor's edge of a decision he could never fully walk back from. Jasmine read the anger bloomin' inside him. The instant Todd Reynolds shifted his weight and raised the baton higher, Jasmine Carter's body responded without conscious thought. Years of training had hardwired her reactions beyond hesitation, beyond second-guessing. She dropped her center of gravity slightly, muscles coiling as she read the telegraphed swing in his posture before the baton even moved. The world shrank to the narrow space between them, the faint rustle of grass beneath her sneakers, the crackle of leather as Todd's gloved fingers tightened around the steel weapon. The baton came down in a heavy, reckless arc aimed toward her shoulder. Not a professional strike, but one fueled by frustration and anger. Jasmine pivoted hard on her right foot, her torso twisting smoothly away from the attack. She stepped inside the arc instead of retreating, a move that deflected the brunt of his momentum while bringing her body dangerously close to his. Her left hand shot up instinctively, intercepting his wrist mid-swing with a sharp, controlled block. The baton's path veered wide as the force of his own attack unbalanced him slightly. Jasmine used the moment, a tiny crack in his control, to execute a fluid disarm. She twisted her hand sharply against the line of Todd's grip, targeting the natural weak points between his thumb and fingers. The baton clattered against the damp grass with a sharp metallic thunk, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness of the park. The impact startled a flock of pigeons from a nearby tree, their wings beating noisily into the night. Todd stumbled a half-step backward, blinking in surprise as if reality had abruptly shifted under his boots. Jasmine dropped into a ready stance out of habit, one knee bent, arms raised loosely, weight centered and light on the balls of her feet. She did not advance. She did not press the advantage. Her training pulsed through her veins, demanding discipline over ego, control over rage. Neutralize the threat without escalation. Defend, do not attack. De-escalate if possible. She kept her eyes locked on Todd's face, reading the chaos flashing across his features. Confusion first, then embarrassment, and finally a raw, seething fury. His hand twitched at his belt, as if considering reaching for another weapon, but froze halfway through the motion. His breathing was ragged now, more from rage than exertion, his chest rising and falling rapidly under the layers of his uniform. For a few precious seconds, the park stood silent again. The baton lay between them, gleaming dully under the sputtering yellow lamplight. Jasmine did not speak. She knew that words at this moment would be gasoline on an open flame. She remained still, breathing slow and deep, heart pounding but steady, letting him decide what would come next. Todd's mouth twisted into something between a grimace and a snarl. His eyes flicked to the baton on the ground, then back to Jasmine. She could see the calculation in his face, the wounded pride battling the survival instinct. A sane man would have stepped back, collected his fallen authority, and retreated to fight another day. But Todd Reynolds was not sane in that moment. He was a man drowning in the realization that the illusion of control he clung to so tightly had slipped from his fingers like smoke. The grass underfoot was damp and slick, but Jasmine maintained her footing effortlessly, her body tuned to the smallest shifts in terrain, her balance as natural as breathing. Todd shifted his stance, spreading his legs wider in a crude show of dominance, his right hand clenched and unclenched at his side. "You just made a big mistake," he spat, voice raw and shaking. Jasmine said nothing. She offered no apology, no explanation, no justification. The facts spoke louder than any words could. He had attacked. She had defended. The baton on the ground bore silent witness to everything. Another gust of wind tore through the park, bending the treetops and scattering loose leaves across the path. The lamplight flickered again, making the world stutter for an instant in fits of brightness and shadow. Todd's face contorted, his shoulders tightening as if he were about to lunge again. Jasmine stayed poised, ready to move if necessary, but rooted in the principle that had been drilled into her from the first day she had stepped onto a dojo mat. React only when there is no other choice. Do not feed aggression. Do not fuel chaos. The distance between them felt electric, the tension vibrating in the cold night air. Jasmine's muscles ached with restraint, her every instinct screaming to end this cleanly, efficiently, but her mind stayed in control. Discipline was the only thing that separated her from him right now. For a brief moment, it seemed as if Todd might reconsider. His weight shifted backward slightly, the smallest hint of retreat. Jasmine caught it immediately, the subtle slackening of the muscles, the fractional easing of breath. But the moment passed. Todd's eyes burned with fresh rage, his fists curling tightly. He ground his teeth audibly, the sound grating in the stillness. His boots shifted against the damp grass, and Jasmine tensed in response, reading the signs of another imminent charge. She did not lower her stance. She did not break eye contact. She remained a pillar of calm in the storm of his unraveling self-control, refusing to give him the emotional chaos he craved. The baton lay between them, untouched, a silent marker of the line that had already been crossed. Todd was not about to back down. Todd Reynolds shifted his stance on the damp grass, his breathing ragged as frustration threatened to completely overwhelm his judgment. The baton lay abandoned between him and Jasmine Carter, a mute testament to the humiliation he could neither deny nor erase. His fingers twitched near the holster on his right hip where the black and yellow taser rested, its familiar weight promising a shortcut back to dominance. In a single, fluid motion, driven more by anger than calculation, Todd yanked the taser free and aimed it squarely at Jasmine's chest. The sharp sound of the taser, arming itself, cracked through the heavy night air, a mechanical whine that signaled the weapon's readiness. The distance between them was just enough for a clean shot, and Todd squeezed the trigger with the expectation of instant compliance. Thin wires shot forward, carrying with them two metal probes designed to embed into skin or fabric, delivering a debilitating electrical charge intended to lock muscles and drop a suspect where they stood. But Jasmine was already moving. Even before the prongs could find their mark, she twisted her body sideways with the grace and precision of years of training. The probes sailed harmlessly past her, one striking the base of a nearby trash can with a dull thud, the other disappearing into the grass. The taser's wires snapped taut, vibrating uselessly in the air. Todd's eyes widened in disbelief as the weapon failed to bring her down. The momentum of his failed shot jerked his arm awkwardly, and he stumbled one step forward, trying to recalibrate. Jasmine's body remained loose, ready, her breathing calm even as her heart raced under the surface. Her movements were efficient, economical, minimizing the time she gave him to react. Todd instinctively pulled the taser's trigger again, but with no contact made, the device only clicked uselessly, its charge expended. He cursed under his breath and yanked the weapon back toward his chest, eyes darting wildly as he scrambled for an alternative plan. His confidence, already battered, now teetered dangerously close to collapse. The faint, unmistakable glow of playground equipment appeared in the background behind them, marking the edge of the children's area at the far side of Ashton Park. The colorful structures stood empty and ghost-like in the dim light, a surreal backdrop to the confrontation unfolding just yards away. The gravel crunched beneath Todd's boots as he tried to reposition himself, squaring his shoulders as if sheer aggression could compensate for the tactical disaster he had just created. Jasmine remained still for a fraction of a second, reading his every movement, weighing whether he intended another attack. Her body was ready to move again at a moment's notice, muscle memory carrying her through the storm of adrenaline flooding her veins. The discarded baton still glinted faintly on the ground, forgotten in Todd's rush to escalate. His taser, now spent, hung loosely from his right hand, wires trailing uselessly across the grass. He was running out of weapons, and worse for him, he was running out of justifications. A muffled sound broke the tense silence, the soft scuff of sneakers approaching from the far side of the playground. Neither Todd nor Jasmine turned their heads, but Jasmine's peripheral vision caught the slight movement. A figure, slim and quick, lingered near the low fence separating the play structures from the walking paths. A teenager, maybe 16 or 17, held a smartphone half raised in trembling hands, the screen glowing faintly against the darkness. Todd's eyes narrowed, catching the movement a second later. His mouth tightened into a grim line. He knew what that meant. Recording. Witnesses. He had lost the insulation of secrecy that the darkness had briefly provided. Whatever happened next would no longer be confined to the cracked paths and dim lamplight of the park. It could spill outward, into the public, into scrutiny he could not control. Jasmine stayed rooted, grounded, giving him no excuse to claim she was attacking. She let the silence stretch, offering him a final opportunity to retreat, to de-escalate, to salvage something from the wreckage he had created. But Todd's pride was a heavy thing, a beast that snarled and refused to be muzzled. He flicked his gaze back to her, taser dangling uselessly at his side, and took a step forward, a short, aggressive movement designed to provoke. Jasmine tensed, but held her ground. She would not give him the reaction he sought. Every inch of her discipline told her that restraint was the sharpest weapon she could wield now. The teenager at the fence edged closer, the phone now clearly raised, the red record light blinking steadily. Jasmine caught the detail without shifting her attention from Todd. That recording could be the difference between isolation and accountability, between being another unseen statistic and forcing the truth into daylight. Todd hesitated, his breathing harsh and erratic. His eyes flicked once more to the phone recording everything, the realization solidifying into something dangerous in his posture. He could not undo what had already been captured. He could only double down or back off. And judging by the way his fists clenched at his sides, doubling down was the path he was most tempted to take. The lamplight buzzed overhead, casting a flickering halo around them. The playground behind the fence seemed to hold its breath. The gravel underfoot felt sharper, more present, as if the earth itself waited for the next decision. Jasmine shifted slightly, angling her body between Todd and the young bystander. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to protect the kid from any sudden explosion of violence. She kept her hands visible, open, refusing to surrender the visual narrative that she posed no threat. Todd's lips curled back into a sneer, and for a heartbeat, Jasmine thought he might charge again. Taser discarded, fists swinging. Her muscles tensed, ready to respond if he did, but something flickered in his eyes. A recognition, cold and bitter, that the situation had spiraled too far beyond his control to salvage cleanly. He straightened slightly, chest heaving, nostrils flaring with suppressed rage. His taser hand trembled once before dropping entirely to his side. Jasmine remained silent, still as stone, watching him closely, every nerve taut with readiness. A young bystander accidentally captured the entire incident on video. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the tension first. Soft at first, a rhythmic scuff of sneakers against pavement, growing louder with each passing second. Jasmine Carter caught the movement out of the corner of her eye without turning her head, keeping her attention rooted on Todd Reynolds. Across the dimly lit park path, figures began to emerge from the darkness. Runners, their reflective vests flashing faintly under the sputtering streetlights, slowing their pace as they caught sight of the scene unfolding ahead. The first jogger, a tall man in his late 20s, slowed to a cautious jog, his eyes flicking between the taser wires trailing across the ground and the rigid stance of the officer with the spent weapon dangling at his side. Behind him, a woman in black leggings and a bright pink hoodie pulled her earbuds free, her mouth slightly open in confusion. A third runner, younger and wearing a loose college sweatshirt, came to a full stop, his breathing heavy from the exertion but his focus locked entirely on the strange tableau before him. They saw the tension immediately. Even without context, the charged air, the aggressive posture of the officer, and the unwavering stillness of the woman facing him spoke volumes. Conversations faltered. A few of the joggers instinctively drifted toward the edges of the path, slowing their steps, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing without getting too close. Jasmine remained motionless, feeling the weight of the new eyes on them. Her heart pounded steadily against her ribs, but her breathing stayed measured. She knew that the presence of bystanders could shift the dynamics of an encounter like this, but it could also inflame it if Todd chose escalation over retreat. The joggers exchanged uncertain glances. They hovered at the perimeter of the confrontation, unwilling to intervene directly but equally unwilling to look away. One of them, a wiry man with a reflective band across his chest, pulled out his phone, holding it low but unmistakably recording. Jasmine noted it without shifting her posture, knowing it added another layer of accountability Todd would have to consider. Todd's gaze darted toward the newcomers, the sneer on his face slipping into something harder to define. Panic edged into his posture, stiffening his arms, tightening the line of his shoulders. He turned his head slightly, taking in the growing cluster of witnesses, and for a brief second, indecision flickered across his features. He could feel their judgment, even in their silence. Their presence challenged his narrative before he could even voice it. No longer was it his word against hers in the isolation of the night. Every move, every word, every aggressive breath was now being weighed, recorded, remembered. A woman with short blonde hair and a neon yellow jacket moved closer, her hands up in a non-threatening gesture. "Is everything okay here, officer?" she asked, her voice cautious but carrying clearly through the night air. Todd's jaw clenched. He did not answer immediately. He shifted his stance, stepping forward half a pace, as if to block Jasmine from view. His fingers twitched near his belt again, but without a fresh weapon to draw, the movement only revealed his growing desperation. "We're fine," he barked, sharper than necessary, the sound echoing awkwardly off the nearby playground structures. "Move along. This is police business." The joggers did not move. If anything, their presence solidified, their curiosity hardening into concern. The man with the reflective band lowered his phone slightly, but kept the camera aimed. Another woman, standing just behind the fence, crossed her arms and tilted her head, skepticism plain on her face. Jasmine remained still, allowing Todd's frustration to stew under the weight of their scrutiny. She knew better than to speak now. Every word he said, every movement he made, only further revealed the imbalance of the situation to those gathering around them. The tension thickened, heavy and suffocating. The quiet of the park seemed to amplify every sound. The buzz of the street lamp overhead, the faint rustle of leaves, the ragged quality of Todd's breathing as he struggled to maintain control. A few more runners slowed as they approached, drawn by the unnatural stillness and the cluster of people gathered near the playground. Within minutes, a small audience had formed, their faces lit unevenly by the distant lights, their body language cautious but collectively leaning toward Jasmine's side without a word needing to be spoken. Todd shifted again, planting his boots wider, squaring his shoulders in a visible attempt to reclaim the authority slipping away from him. His gaze swept across the group, searching for any sign of submission, any willingness to disperse at his command. He found none. Instead, he saw skeptical faces, wary eyes, and the glint of more phones being quietly raised. The realization that he was cornered without backup, without control, gnawed viciously at his nerves. His mind raced, searching for a way to reassert himself, to reframe the scene before it fully collapsed beyond his influence. Jasmine felt the shift in his energy the moment it happened, a subtle tightening of muscles, a hardening of his stare. She prepared herself without moving, feeling the brittle tension crystallize into something dangerous. Todd's breathing grew harsher, the veins in his neck standing out as he fought against the rising panic. Every fiber of him screamed to act, to do something that would wrest the narrative back into his hands. The weight of the bystanders' judgment became too much to bear, pressing him into a decision that even he must have known was reckless. Todd, growing more desperate, made a reckless decision. Todd Reynolds felt the last threads of his restraint snap, as if they had been stretched too tightly for too long. His vision tunneled, the scattered faces of the bystanders around him blurring into a sea of judgmental stares. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, each beat fueling the firestorm inside him. Without conscious thought, he surged forward, boots grinding against the damp grass, arms tensed, fists clenched, no plan, only pure, blinding anger driving him. Jasmine Carter watched it unfold with unnerving clarity. Todd's body language betrayed him before his muscles even fired, the wild energy radiating from him like a flare. She shifted her footing slightly on the soft grass, reading every angle, every sloppy adjustment in his form as he barreled toward her. Her body remained loose, responsive, tuned to the impending impact without needing to consciously prepare. Todd launched himself at her, both hands reaching, aiming to seize, to overpower, to physically impose the authority he no longer commanded with his badge or voice. His right hand shot forward, fingers splayed wide, reaching for her upper arm. His left followed a fraction of a second later, seeking to clamp onto her shoulder. His intention was obvious. Grab, shove, dominate. Jasmine pivoted on the ball of her right foot, letting his momentum carry him into open space. At the last moment, she dropped her weight low and twisted her torso sharply, stepping aside with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned martial artist. Todd lunged past her, off balance, his own force pulling him forward into the open patch of flickering light where the weak street lamp fought against the dark. He stumbled slightly but recovered, whirling around to face her, his face twisted into a snarl. His hands came up again, fists now clenched in a boxer's stance, but it was a stance built from desperation, not training. His movements were wide, telegraphed, leaving gaping holes in his defense that any trained fighter would recognize instantly. The bystanders drew closer, instinctively tightening their half-circle around the confrontation. The flickering lamplight overhead strobed the scene in flashes of uneven brightness, making Todd's movements look even more erratic and disjointed. Todd lunged again, swinging his right arm in a wild, looping arc meant to catch Jasmine across the face or shoulder. Jasmine leaned back just enough to let the punch sail through empty air, her body staying relaxed and fluid. She sidestepped again, keeping her balance perfectly centered, refusing to be baited into reacting aggressively. The air between them crackled with tension, the smell of sweat, grass, and raw emotion thick under the weak glow of the lights. Todd charged once more, closing the distance recklessly, his body a battering ram driven by humiliation and rage. This time, Jasmine shifted her left foot behind her right, allowing his momentum to collapse into the empty space she left behind. As he passed her shoulder, she extended one hand with minimal force, redirecting his center of gravity further off balance. Todd stumbled, but stayed upright, his boots tearing shallow divots in the soft earth. He turned, panting heavily, his face flushed deep red, veins standing out along his neck. The joggers, watching from the sidelines, murmured quietly among themselves, their phones raised higher now, some capturing video, others dialing numbers. Still, Jasmine did not retaliate. She remained steady, neutral, refusing to escalate. Her breathing was deep and controlled, her muscles ready to move at the slightest signal, but restrained until absolutely necessary. Todd wiped the back of his hand across his mouth, the gesture twitchy and uncoordinated. His eyes darted to the faces watching him, judging him, and then snapped back to Jasmine, burning with hate and humiliation. He shouted, an inarticulate burst of sound, and charged again. This time he dropped his shoulder, trying to tackle her around the waist. Jasmine shifted her stance quickly, angling her body away, letting him graze past her hip without gaining any grip. As he lunged forward, she placed a flat palm against his upper back and guided his weight downward with a sharp, practiced push. Todd hit the ground hard, his knees and palms slamming into the damp grass with a heavy, graceless thud. A low grunt of pain escaped him, but he pushed himself up immediately, scrambling to his feet with wild, jerky movements. His hat had been knocked askew, and dirt streaked the side of his uniform. The park seemed to hold its breath. Even the distant sounds of the city felt muffled, pushed away by the raw immediacy of the confrontation. Jasmine stood poised a few feet away, breathing easily, hands still open and non-threatening. She had not thrown a punch. She had not lashed out. She had simply used his aggression against him, over and over, letting him defeat himself in front of witnesses and cameras. Todd's hands trembled visibly now. His anger, unchecked and unrefined, had drained much of his strength. He panted heavily, sweat darkening the back of his uniform, making it cling awkwardly to his frame. Jasmine's eyes never left him. She was a study in contrast, calm where he was frantic, controlled where he was wild, deliberate where he was reckless. Every movement she made was minimal, efficient, conserving energy while letting him expend his infurious, ineffective bursts. The grass around them bore the marks of the struggle, shallow divots where Todd had stumbled, trampled blades where his boots had dug in. The baton still lay forgotten several feet away, its presence a silent reminder of how the confrontation had spiraled out of control. Todd's fists hung loosely at his sides now, half raised, half defeated. His mouth opened as if to shout again, but no words came. Only heavy, labored breathing filled the gap. The bystanders, sensing the shift, edged a little closer. Phones gleamed steadily in the low light, capturing every frame, every grimace, every stagger. The story was no longer just between Jasmine and Todd. It had already escaped into the larger world. But Jasmine still controlled the fight. The circle of onlookers held its breath as Officer Todd Reynolds staggered forward again, refusing to accept the defeat written in the slump of his shoulders and the uncoordinated fury in his steps. Jasmine Carter remained motionless for a heartbeat longer, her stance loose but ready, the way a river remains still before the current snaps into movement. Her eyes tracked Todd's every twitch, reading his next action before his muscles even completed the thought. Todd's boots pounded against the grass as he lunged once more, a last desperate attempt to salvage the shattered pieces of his pride. His arms reached out wildly, hands clawing for purchase against the night. He wanted to tackle her, to drive her into the ground with brute force, but his attack was sloppy, unbalanced by exhaustion and rage. Jasmine sidestepped cleanly, pivoting on the ball of her foot. She allowed him to overextend, to give her all the momentum she needed. In one fluid movement, she captured his outstretched arm, her fingers locking just above his elbow. She turned her hips sharply, dropping her center of gravity, and with a precise, practiced motion, she redirected his entire body weight forward and downward. The technique was pure judo, clean and efficient. She used his force against him, not resisting, not blocking, simply allowing gravity and his own recklessness to finish the work. Todd's body flipped forward over her hip, his legs momentarily airborne before he crashed to the grass with a thud that seemed to reverberate through the ground itself. The bystanders gasped, a collective intake of breath that snapped the night even tighter around them. Phones captured the moment, the blur of movement, the undeniable skill of Jasmine's technique. Todd lay on his back, stunned, his limbs splayed awkwardly, blinking up at the dim sky as if it had betrayed him. Jasmine stepped back immediately, hands open, palms facing downward in a clear gesture of non-aggression. She had not harmed him. She had not retaliated with violence. She had simply neutralized his attack with the minimum necessary force, maintaining control without inflicting damage. Todd rolled onto his side with a grunt, his face twisted in confusion and disbelief. For a long moment he stayed there, breathing heavily, the realization of his defeat sinking deeper into his bones. The world around him felt distant, the murmuring of the crowd a low, accusatory tide he could not stem. Jasmine kept her breathing steady, not moving closer, not provoking. She gave him the space to make his own next choice, but her posture made it clear. Any further aggression would be met with the same calm, measured response. The flickering streetlight buzzed overhead, casting their long, fractured shadows across the grass. The baton lay still where it had fallen earlier, forgotten and impotent. The spent taser wires glistened weakly in the dewy grass. Among the joggers, the atmosphere shifted. What had started as curiosity was hardening into a kind of silent outrage. They had witnessed everything: the disproportionate aggression, the unnecessary escalation, the wild desperation. They understood now, even without knowing all the details. Jasmine stood as a symbol of composure and discipline. Todd had unraveled into a spectacle of unchecked rage. Someone whispered sharply, their voice carrying just enough to be heard. "He's out of control," another muttered. "She's not even fighting back." The energy in the circle thickened with a growing sense of collective judgment. Todd pushed himself to his knees, swaying slightly. His hands dug into the wet grass, clenching handfuls of earth as if trying to ground himself against the humiliation drowning him. His mouth opened in a guttural attempt to bark some order, some declaration of authority, but no sound emerged. Only his ragged breathing filled the space between him and the woman who had bested him without cruelty, without even raising her voice. Jasmine stood a few steps back, posture relaxed but vigilant. Her calmness was a mirror held up to his chaos, exposing him more cruelly than any strike could have. She did not need to say a word. The truth hung heavy in the night air for everyone to see. Todd staggered to his feet, his legs trembling with fatigue and frustration. His hands balled into fists again, but the futility of it showed in his hunched shoulders and lowered eyes. He stood not as an officer anymore, but as a man stripped of power, cloaked only in the remnants of his own anger. The crowd shifted again, someone stepping closer, another raising a phone higher to capture every detail. The weight of the witnesses bore down on Todd, an invisible pressure he could neither escape nor deny. Then, cutting through the thick night air, a new sound emerged, a sharp, clipped voice carried on the breeze. "Stay where you are." Todd's head jerked up. Jasmine turned slightly, her eyes narrowing. From the far side of the park, near the entrance to the playground, another figure approached. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, brighter, steadier, different from Todd's erratic, spent light. The figure moved with purpose, the silhouette unmistakably that of another officer. The second flashlight beam cut through the night. The second flashlight beam cut across the park like a blade, sweeping over the scene with deliberate precision. The murmur of the gathered joggers dropped to a tense, expectant hush as the source of the light emerged into view. A patrol vehicle, far newer than Todd Reynolds' battered cruiser, had pulled up along the edge of the playground, its headlights throwing long beams through the misty air. From the driver's side, a figure stepped out with an authority that was unmistakable even at a distance. Sergeant Marcus Hill, walked toward the cluster, his movements purposeful but controlled. His uniform was crisp despite the hour, his utility belt organized, every item in its place. A veteran presence radiated from him, not just years of service, but the kind of leadership that came from handling real crises, not manufacturing them. His dark skin caught the glint of the headlights as he adjusted the radio clip to his shoulder, eyes scanning the crowd without missing a single detail. Todd straightened visibly at the sight of him, though the effort was clearly painful. He wiped his hands on his pants unconsciously, trying to muster some semblance of control over his disheveled appearance. His hat hung lopsided on his head, and dirt smeared the knees of his uniform. But he squared his shoulders as Sergeant Hill approached. The crowd parted slightly to give the sergeant a clear path, though their eyes stayed locked on him, their phones still recording, their faces a mosaic of anticipation, anger, and hope. Hill's gaze landed first on Todd, then shifted quickly to Jasmine, standing a few feet back with her hands still visible, calm and poised. Hill's jaw tightened at the sight of the taser wires stretched uselessly across the grass, the abandoned baton gleaming dully near Todd's boots, and the clear, unmistakable posture of a civilian who had refused to be bullied but had not once initiated violence. Without raising his voice, Hill commanded the space with a single sentence. "Report," he said sharply, his tone brooking no argument. Todd hesitated, his mouth opening and closing once before any words came out. "Subject was acting suspiciously," he said, his voice hoarse. "Failed to comply. Resisted. Escalated." Hill's expression did not change, but the silence that followed Todd's stumbling explanation was louder than any shouted accusation could have been. Hill's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in the growing group of bystanders, their cameras steady, their faces telling a very different story than the one Todd had just tried to frame. The sergeant shifted his stance, planting his boots firmly on the grass. His flashlight remained steady in his left hand, but his right hovered near the microphone at his shoulder. Every line of his body communicated patience, but also a readiness to act if the situation called for it. He turned his attention fully onto Jasmine then, his voice firm but markedly different from Todd's earlier aggression. "Ma'am," he said, dipping his head in a gesture of acknowledgement, "you'll have the opportunity to provide your account. Right now, I need you to remain exactly where you are and answer a few preliminary questions." Jasmine inclined her head slightly, her voice clear and even. "Of course, Sergeant." Hill gave a curt nod, turning his attention briefly back to Todd. "Officer Reynolds, step aside. Stand over there," he said, pointing toward a patch of open grass a few feet away from the main path. Todd stiffened as if to argue, but caught himself under the weight of Hill's unwavering stare. He shuffled to the indicated spot, every movement heavy with reluctant compliance. The sergeant waited until Todd was firmly out of immediate proximity before refocusing on Jasmine. His approach was methodical, professional, the kind of deliberate calm that disarmed conflict before it could ignite. He scanned her quickly. No weapons, no aggressive posture, no signs of physical threat, and gave another slight nod of acknowledgement. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, stepping back just enough to avoid crowding her, his flashlight dipping slightly so it no longer shone in her face. Around them, the joggers tightened their circle, their phones still recording, but their body language softened slightly in response to Hill's presence. It was clear to anyone watching that a real authority figure had arrived, not someone looking to dominate, but someone seeking to understand. Jasmine inhaled slowly, her mind sorting through the chaos of the last 20 minutes, anchoring herself to the discipline that had carried her this far. She spoke clearly, succinctly, giving a step-by-step account without embellishment or emotion. Her words cut through the heavy night air, sharp and undeniable. She described her walk home, the patrol car flashing its lights and disappearing, the sudden stop by Officer Reynolds, the unreasonable search demand, the baton drawn without cause, the taser fired without provocation, and the physical assaults that followed. She detailed every action she took, the way she de-escalated, the way she refused to fight unless absolutely necessary. She laid out the facts cleanly, letting the truth hang between them, undeniable under the weight of multiple eyewitnesses and rolling cameras. Hill listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking short, pointed clarifications where needed, but never interrupting her flow. His expression remained neutral, but Jasmine caught the faint tightening at the corners of his mouth when she described the baton being drawn. When she finished, Hill stood silent for a beat longer, processing everything. He gave a low, brief exhale through his nose, almost a sigh, but heavier, more burdened. Jasmine was invited to recount everything. Jasmine Carter stood tall at the center of the small gathering, her frame steady, her voice even as she addressed both Sergeant Marcus Hill and the collection of concerned citizens who had witnessed the incident unfold. The grass beneath her sneakers was still damp from the evening air, but her footing was solid, rooted in the unshakable certainty of the truth she carried. Around her, the crowd had grown, their faces illuminated intermittently by the blinking lights of recording phones and the occasional sweep of a flashlight. Some watched silently, expressions tight with anger or disbelief. Others whispered among themselves, the sound carrying like restless wind through the cooling night. In every direction, eyes stayed trained on Jasmine, not with suspicion, but with an expectancy that hung heavily in the mist. Sergeant Hill stood a few steps back, his arms crossed over his broad chest, listening intently without interruption. His flashlight was now clipped to his vest, freeing his hands, but the disciplined vigilance in his posture made it clear he remained alert to any sudden shift in the situation. He had given Jasmine space to speak and intended to hear every word. Jasmine took a breath and began, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension. She detailed how she had left her self-defense class, how she noticed the unusual behavior of a patrol car near the community center, and how, despite her wariness, she chose the familiar route through the park. Her account was precise, free of exaggeration, anchored in objective fact. She described Todd Reynolds' initial confrontation, the unwarranted demands to search her belongings, the aggressive escalation when she asserted her rights, the drawing of his baton, and the attempted use of his taser when she refused to submit without cause. She spoke carefully but firmly about how she had defended herself, never once initiating violence, only redirecting Todd's reckless aggression with minimal force, ensuring neither of them suffered serious injury. Her tone was professional, almost clinical, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of righteous anger woven through her words. As she spoke, the joggers nodded subtly among themselves, their earlier confusion hardening into quiet support. They had seen enough to fill in the gaps of her story, enough to recognize the stark contrast between her composed demeanor and Todd's unprovoked fury. A few exchanged glances, their silent consensus clear. Jasmine was telling the truth. Sergeant Hill maintained his neutral expression, but there was no hiding the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth when Jasmine calmly recounted how Todd had fired his taser even after she had visibly complied with every lawful command. His gaze flicked briefly toward Todd, who lingered awkwardly several yards away, shoulders hunched, face tight with a mixture of anger and apprehension. When Jasmine finished speaking, she stepped back slightly, allowing the silence to settle over the group like a heavy, undeniable weight. The street lamp overhead buzzed faintly, casting elongated shadows across the grass, but otherwise the night held still, as if the park itself waited for a response. Hill let a long moment pass before he finally moved, adjusting the radio on his shoulder. His voice remained calm, but there was a new edge of authority in it now, sharper, colder. "Officer Reynolds," he said without raising his voice. "You heard her account. Do you have anything to add?" All heads turned toward Todd, who shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again as he visibly struggled to gather his thoughts. Sweat glistened on his forehead and the stain of humiliation had spread down his neck. Todd started, his voice cracking slightly. He coughed, straightened his posture, and tried again, louder this time. She was acting suspicious. She didn't cooperate. She refused lawful orders. His words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The crowd did not murmur approval or shift sympathetically toward him. Instead, the silence deepened, thick with disbelief. The joggers' phones remained steadily pointed in his direction, capturing every word, every twitch of discomfort. Todd shifted his weight from foot to foot, grasping for justification. "I was concerned for public safety," he added hastily. "She could have been carrying something dangerous." Jasmine did not flinch at the accusation, her expression remaining composed, but the collective exhale of the crowd spoke volumes. Hill's gaze sharpened. "You found no weapons on her?" he said bluntly. "No contraband? No indication of threat, correct?" Todd hesitated. His hands twitched uselessly at his sides. "No," he admitted, grudgingly, the word barely above a whisper. The weight of the admission landed heavily. Todd looked around, desperate for some foothold, some support, but found only the steady, unmoving stares of citizens who had seen too much to be swayed by his flimsy narrative. One of the younger joggers, a tall man with a reflective sash across his chest, spoke up from the edge of the circle. "I saw everything," he said, his voice loud and clear. "She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't even being aggressive. You're the one who charged at her." A chorus of murmured agreement rippled through the crowd, more voices chiming in now, emboldened by the clear shift in momentum. Todd's face flushed deeper, his fists clenching at his sides, but he remained rooted to the spot, trapped by the unstoppable gravity of the truth unraveling around him. Sergeant Hill turned back to Jasmine, his expression grim but respectful. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You handled yourself with restraint and professionalism under extreme circumstances." Todd attempted to justify himself. The dampness of the grass clung to Officer Todd Reynolds' boots as he shifted uneasily under the brittle glare of the streetlights. Every inch of his uniform felt heavier now, soaked not by rain, but by the weight of the silent judgment pressing down from all sides. The joggers, still circling at a respectful but unyielding distance, had their phones raised, recording every grimace, every stutter, every desperate flail for control he had left. Sergeant Marcus Hill stood unmoving, arms crossed, face carved from stone. He watched Todd with an intensity that demanded truth and brooked no evasion. The faint buzz of the street lamp overhead filled the otherwise tense stillness, the city beyond the park receding into irrelevance compared to the battle for accountability happening on the wet grass. Todd straightened his spine, forcing his shoulders back in a mockery of professional posture. He opened his mouth to speak, hesitated, then blurted out, "She refused lawful orders. She resisted arrest. That alone gives me grounds to act." Hill's eyebrow twitched, a minute movement that conveyed more skepticism than any words could. He said nothing, giving Todd enough rope to continue tying his own noose. "I had reason to believe she was carrying dangerous items," Todd rushed on, his voice pitching higher. "I tried to de-escalate, but she, he faltered, the accusation dying on his tongue. Every eye in the circle stayed pinned to him, waiting, measuring, recording. "She what? Reynolds?" Hill prompted, voice low but cutting. Todd's fists curled and uncurled at his sides. He glanced around the circle, as if hoping for some sympathetic face among the onlookers, but found none. Only steady, unimpressed stares and the unblinking red dots of recording phones. One of the joggers, a woman in a gray hoodie with her hair pulled back in a tight braid, lifted her phone higher. "We have the whole thing on video," she said flatly. "Everything." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Todd's face flushed crimson. His breathing grew uneven, shallow, as he struggled to maintain any shred of dignity. "That footage is incomplete," he barked, the words exploding from him. "You don't have context. You don't know what she did before I arrived." The woman did not even flinch. "We started recording when you first shouted at her to stop. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was walking. You're the one who escalated." Hill's expression hardened. He turned slightly to address the gathered witnesses without taking his eyes off Todd. "If anyone has video footage of this incident, please save it. You may be contacted to provide it as evidence." A few joggers nodded. Some gave verbal affirmations. Todd's mouth opened to protest, but no sound came. His authority, once unquestioned under the badge and uniform, had evaporated under the harsh glare of accountability. Jasmine Carter remained still, her posture relaxed but watchful. She had no need to speak now. The truth carried its own weight, and it was bearing down mercilessly on Todd. Desperation flickered across his face. He gestured weakly toward the taser wires still strewn across the grass. "She avoided a lawful use of force," he said, reaching for anything that might salvage his position. "That alone," Hill's voice cut across him like a whip, "avoiding unlawful force is not resisting arrest," he said, each word deliberate and sharp. "And from what I'm seeing, from what I'm hearing, the only escalation tonight came from you, Officer Reynolds." The emphasis on officer was not lost on anyone standing there. Todd's shoulders sagged slightly, the rigid facade cracking. He looked smaller now, diminished not by physical defeat but by the slow, grinding collapse of every excuse he tried to muster. His fingers twitched at his sides, hands clenching and unclenching as if he could somehow physically grab hold of the crumbling situation and patch it back together. Hill stepped forward, closing the distance between them by 2 measured paces. The grass squelched faintly under his boots. His eyes locked onto Todd's, giving him no room to look away, no escape into the shadows. "Officer Reynolds," Hill said, his voice low but carrying easily through the heavy air, "based on the preliminary witness statements, the footage provided, and your own contradictory account, I am relieving you of duty effective immediately, pending a full investigation." The words fell like hammer blows. "You are to surrender your badge and service weapon," Hill continued, his tone flat and final, "right now." A low gasp ran through the crowd. Jasmine remained motionless, observing the unraveling with the same calm focus that had carried her through the confrontation. Todd's mouth opened in stunned disbelief. You can't." "I can," Hill interrupted, the first true steel entering his voice. "And I am." Todd's body sagged visibly, the final tether snapping. With shaking hands, he reached for the clasp at his belt, fumbling with the badge pinned there. He unhooked it clumsily and handed it over. Hill took it without ceremony, slipping it into a pouch on his vest. The service weapon followed, removed with agonizing slowness, as if by dragging it out, Todd could somehow delay the inevitable. Hill received it, cleared it expertly, and secured it in a secondary holster. The joggers murmured among themselves, the tension in the air beginning to shift from fearful anticipation to something resembling cautious relief. The park, moments ago a pressure cooker, now seemed to exhale slowly, the grass no longer bracing under the weight of unchecked violence. Todd stood in the wet grass, stripped of his symbols of power, reduced to nothing more than a man who had overreached and been held accountable in full view of those he had tried to intimidate. Hill ordered Todd to be immediately suspended. The damp grass muffled the heavy steps, as Officer Todd Reynolds was led away from the scene, stripped of his badge, weapon, and the thin authority he had clung to so desperately. Sergeant Marcus Hill walked beside him, maintaining a careful distance but never letting his gaze drop from the man he had just suspended. Hill's posture remained firm, radiating a professionalism that could not be mistaken for anything but deliberate control. The small crowd of joggers and onlookers stayed clustered at the edge of the park path, their phones still raised, documenting every second. Their faces bore a mixture of quiet satisfaction, lingering anger, and relief, but no one moved to block the retreat. They simply watched, unblinking, as Todd shuffled across the wet field under the unforgiving glare of streetlights and cell phone screens. Todd's head remained bowed, his hat crumpled in one hand, his footsteps dragging slightly with each reluctant move toward the waiting patrol car. His face, once contorted with rage, now seemed hollow, drained of the bluster and violence that had driven him into disgrace. The crispness of his uniform, the authority of his belt and radio had all been reduced to meaningless props hanging off a man who had lost more than his temper. He had lost the trust of those who were supposed to look to him for protection. Sergeant Hill said nothing as they moved, allowing the silence to deliver the judgment that words would have only diluted. His presence was shield enough for the moment, a living wall ensuring that no further lines were crossed, that no final desperate act of foolishness would mar the already irreparable night. At the edge of the path, Hill paused. He turned to Todd with an efficiency that was neither cruel nor forgiving. "Stay in the vehicle until instructed otherwise," he ordered, voice clipped but calm. Todd did not reply. He climbed into the back of the second patrol car with a sluggish, defeated motion. The door closed behind him with a mechanical click, sealing him away from the cold eyes of the crowd. Hill turned back toward the center of the park, his attention shifting immediately to where Jasmine Carter stood. She had not moved from her spot throughout the exchange, her stance still composed, her breathing slow and even. In the faint yellow light, her face was a study in control, though Hill, with a veteran's eye, recognized the exhaustion pooling in the set of her shoulders. He approached her with measured steps, giving her the space she deserved but offering the security of his presence. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter now, pitched lower so that only she and a few closest bystanders could hear. "Miss Carter," he said, "we are arranging transportation for you. I would feel better knowing you got home safely." Jasmine hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. She understood the need for caution. Her dignity was intact, but the night's events had shown how quickly perception could shift into danger, how easily a peaceful walk could spiral into survival. One of the patrol cars pulled forward, stopping a few feet away. Hill opened the back passenger door himself, not treating her like a detainee, but like a citizen who deserved the full respect of someone sworn to protect. Jasmine inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement and climbed inside, moving with the same calm economy that had carried her through the night. Hill gave a short nod to the officer at the wheel, a younger man who had arrived during the aftermath and had watched the proceedings with wide, wary eyes. Hill's look was firm, a silent instruction to treat Jasmine with nothing less than full professionalism. The door closed gently behind her, shutting out the worst of the night's chill. Through the window, Jasmine watched the crowd shift and murmur, the energy beginning to thin now that the confrontation had ended. Some joggers drifted away, talking quietly among themselves, their phones still cradled in their hands. Others remained a moment longer, exchanging looks heavy with the knowledge that they had witnessed something they would not easily forget. Hill turned back toward the cluster of remaining civilians. He raised his voice just enough to carry without shouting. "Thank you for remaining calm and cooperative," he said. "We will be following up for statements. If you have video evidence, please preserve it. The integrity of what you witnessed matters." There were nods and murmured agreements. No one protested. The crowd had seen enough to understand what was at stake. Hill watched as the patrol car carrying Jasmine eased away from the park, its headlights cutting two clean lines through the mist as it rolled into the night. Only once she was out of sight did he allow himself a small exhale, the kind that released the tension without surrendering vigilance. Back in the grass, the debris of the night remained. The twisted taser wires, the dropped baton, the scuffed earth where Todd's last stand had collapsed into ignominy. Officers moved efficiently now, photographing the scene, logging evidence, documenting everything that would soon become a file thicker than Todd Reynolds could have ever imagined for himself. Hill stood at the center of it all, the calm eye in a storm that had not been of his making but had been left to him to resolve. He had seen many things over the years, but few incidents had crystallized so quickly, so cleanly into a portrait of what went wrong when anger, ego, and prejudice combined in a man carrying a badge. The night air grew colder as the minutes passed, but Hill remained at the scene until the last evidence marker was placed, until the last statement was recorded, until the last citizen drifted back to the streets and sidewalks where, tomorrow, the weight of what they had witnessed would continue to ripple outward. That night, Jasmine found it hard to sleep. Jasmine Carter sat at the small table by the window, her apartment cloaked in the dim yellow glow of a lone kitchen light. The clock above the sink ticked past midnight, each soft click an anchor in the quiet that seemed heavier than usual. Her gym bag lay abandoned by the door, still unopened from earlier that evening, a silent reminder of how far the night had veered from its intended course. She cradled a mug of herbal tea between her hands, its warmth barely cutting through the chill that had settled in her bones. Despite the comfort of home, despite the locked door and drawn curtains, Jasmine could not unwind. Her body remained tense, coiled like a spring. Sleep hovered somewhere beyond reach, elusive no matter how many times she closed her eyes and tried to will herself into forgetting the image of Todd Reynolds charging at her across the grass. The soft buzz of her phone on the table broke the stillness. Jasmine's heart jumped before she could stop it, a spike of adrenaline flashing through her system. She set down the mug carefully and reached for the device, the screen lighting up to reveal a new message from a number she had saved only hours earlier. Sergeant Marcus Hill. The message was brief, professional, but its weight was profound. Ms. Carter, I wanted to inform you that Officer Reynolds has been officially reported to Internal Affairs. A formal investigation is underway. Thank you again for your cooperation and your composure tonight. Sure. Jasmine stared at the words, her thumb hovering above the screen. Relief, sharp and fleeting, prickled behind her eyes. It was happening. It was real. Todd would not simply walk away from tonight without scrutiny, without consequence. She typed a simple response. Thank you for letting me know. Then she placed the phone back on the table, her fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. She allowed herself a slow, deep breath, willing the knots in her chest to loosen, even if only slightly. The message confirmed what she had fought to believe all evening, that the truth, when laid bare and witnessed, still had the power to change something, that standing firm had not been for nothing. Outside, the city moved in muted rhythms, the distant hum of late traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the low whir of wind skimming along rooftops. Inside her small apartment, the silence folded back over her, thick and dense. Jasmine leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes briefly. She replayed the night in fragments, the beam of Todd's flashlight cutting through the dark, the raised baton, the tense faces of the joggers watching from the edges, the overwhelming need not just to protect herself, but to do so in a way that left no room for doubt, no cracks through which her story could be undermined. She opened her eyes again, staring into the middle distance. Somewhere deep inside, she knew tonight was only the beginning. Investigations moved slowly, Systems built to protect their own did not crumble overnight. But a report was a start, a record, a mark against the shield of impunity that too many had hidden behind for too long. The tea cooled in her cup. Jasmine did not reach for it. Her mind wandered instead to the joggers, the way they had hesitated at first, then stood firmer as the confrontation unfolded. Their phones raised not to interfere, but to witness. It mattered. The accountability they brought to the night's chaos mattered. Her phone buzzed again, a second time in as many minutes. Another surge of adrenaline gripped her chest. She snatched it up instinctively, heart pounding against her ribs. It was not a message this time. It was a call, a known number. She hesitated. Logic told her it was likely Hill or someone from his team, following up to clarify details, perhaps preparing to arrange a formal statement. But another, darker instinct rooted in the long, heavy history that nights like this carried whispered caution. Jasmine stared at the glowing screen for a heartbeat longer before pressing accept and lifting the phone to her ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady despite the thrum of nerves running beneath it. A moment of static crackled on the line before a voice answered. Calm, professional, unfamiliar, but reassuringly measured. "Ms. Carter," the man said, "my name is Detective Evan Brooks. I am with the Internal Affairs Division. Sergeant Hill filed an initial report tonight regarding an incident involving Officer Reynolds. I would like to formally introduce myself and let you know that your case has been assigned for immediate review." Jasmine tightened her grip on the phone, forcing herself to stay present, to absorb every word. "I appreciate you taking the call, especially at this late hour," Brooks continued. "We take incidents like tonight very seriously. We will need a full statement from you in the coming days, but I wanted to assure you personally that what you experienced is not being buried. We have already secured preliminary footage from bystanders. It corroborates much of what has been reported so far." Jasmine's throat felt tight, but she managed to respond. "Thank you for calling. I'm willing to cooperate fully." "Good," Brooks said. His tone softened, just slightly. "For now, please focus on resting. You did exactly what you needed to tonight. Stay available for follow-up contact. We'll be in touch tomorrow to schedule a more detailed interview." "Understood," Jasmine said. The call ended with polite goodbyes and the line went dead. Jasmine lowered the phone slowly, setting it back on the table with a soft tap. The apartment felt heavier now, not darker exactly, but saturated with the knowledge of what had begun. The beginning of a process that would test patience, resilience, and resolve. A new call rang out in the silent room. The early morning sun crept slowly across the tiled floor of the Internal Affairs office, its light slicing through the thin blinds and casting long, muted stripes along the walls. Detective Laura Mitchell sat at her desk, a fresh cup of coffee cooling at her elbow, a stack of preliminary reports spread before her. The room was quiet, the low hum of the central air the only sound aside from the occasional muted conversation down the hall. Laura flipped through the top folder, her sharp eyes catching every detail with a practiced efficiency honed over more than a decade of investigative work. The name on the file, Officer Todd Reynolds, was not new to her. She had seen it before, had heard it murmured in the low tones that carried through locker rooms and behind closed doors, always in the same breath as words like aggressive, reckless, and problematic. Until now, though, there had been no video, no witnesses willing to step forward, no evidence that could not be buried under mountains of paperwork and official excuses. Laura's fingers tapped a slow rhythm against the edge of the desk as she read. The report from Sergeant Marcus Hill was detailed and damning, describing the events at Ashton Park with a precision that left little room for misinterpretation. More powerful than the words, however, was the footage collected from the bystanders. Half a dozen videos from different angles, all painting the same clear, undeniable picture. She clicked play on the first file. Todd's figure stumbled across the grass, his baton raised, his voice sharp and aggressive. Jasmine Carter remained composed throughout, her movements defensive, her posture unthreatening. Every second of footage hammered another nail into the coffin of Todd's defense. Laura leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It was worse than she had anticipated, not just in the brutality of the act, but in the utter collapse of professionalism, the complete disregard for protocol. Todd had not simply lost control. He had abandoned any pretense of proper conduct and let his basest instincts drive him. She opened the internal personnel system and pulled Todd's disciplinary history. Her screen filled with a series of complaints, citizen grievances, use of force reports, informal notations from supervisors that spoke in careful coded language. Words like needs improvement in de-escalation techniques and displays signs of over-assertiveness under stress leapt out at her. It was a pattern, clear as day to anyone who bothered to connect the dots. Complaints quietly closed, warnings filed but never enforced, training recommendations that were either ignored or brushed aside. Todd Reynolds had slipped through the cracks, protected by a culture too willing to excuse aggression as toughness. But this time, Laura thought grimly, there was no escape. The video made it impossible to rewrite the narrative. Witnesses, recording from multiple angles, their voices steady in the background, corroborated every point Jasmine Carter had made in her initial statement. There would be no spinning, no quiet reassignment to another district, no private reprimand buried deep in a personnel file. Laura drafted a preliminary findings memo, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Officer Reynolds displayed conduct unbecoming of his position, engaged in the unnecessary escalation of force, and failed to uphold his duty to protect and serve the public. Immediate administrative leave recommended, pending full investigation and possible termination. She saved the document and prepared a formal notification for her commanding officer's review. Her phone buzzed against the desk, rattling slightly on the hard surface. Laura picked it up without hesitation. "This is Mitchell." "Detective," the voice on the other end said, tight with urgency. "Local news is picking up chatter about the park incident. Someone leaked one of the videos to a reporter. It's starting to make rounds online." Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. "Understood. Stay ahead of it. Issue a standard statement. Internal Affairs is reviewing the incident. No comment on ongoing investigations. Reinforce that steps are being taken." "Yes, ma'am." The call ended, and Laura set the phone down carefully. She felt no surprise. In fact, she welcomed it. Let the world see. Let the shield of secrecy be torn away under the glare of public scrutiny. She pulled up a second file. This one a copy of Todd's last performance review. Even on paper, the signs had been there. Poor judgment in high-stress situations, concerns from fellow officers about his temperament, complaints from civilians that never gained enough momentum to spark action. It had always been there, hiding just beneath the surface, invisible to anyone who chose not to look too closely. Laura stood and moved to the window, parting the blinds slightly with two fingers. The morning light was bright now, warming the tops of the nearby buildings, chasing the lingering mist from the sidewalks. She watched as pedestrians passed below, some sipping coffee, others tapping hurriedly on their phones. The city moved forward, as it always did, but today it carried with it the first cracks in a long-standing wall. She let the blinds fall back into place and turned toward the task ahead. Today would be about more than filling out forms and reviewing videos. Today would be about ensuring that what had started in a quiet park at night would not be buried under bureaucracy. It would be about pushing forward when the inevitable pressure came to minimize, to forgive, to pretend it had been an isolated lapse instead of a symptom of something deeper. Laura picked up her pen and signed off on the preliminary report. The internal process was officially moving. Todd Reynolds' record, once protected, was now a matter of public interest and official scrutiny. The news began to spread. The community center pulsed with quiet determination as Jasmine Carter led her students through another self-defense class. Though the scars of the night before lingered, Jasmine remained steady, teaching not just how to fight, but when not to. "Your mind is your strongest weapon," she told them, emphasizing the discipline that turned survival into strength. As students practiced, Jasmine knew she was building more than skills. She was building resilience. After class, while locking up, a firm knock interrupted her routine. Sergeant Marcus Hill stood at the door, his presence calm but urgent. Inside the office, Hill spoke plainly. "We need you," he said. "We're changing how we train our officers. We need someone who knows what it means to face injustice and still choose restraint. Would you help us?" Jasmine hesitated only a moment. She had resisted, survived, endured. Now, she was being called to help rebuild. She nodded, realizing true change would only happen if people like her stepped inside the walls they once feared. The next night, the center filled with members of the community, people searching for answers, hope, and a way forward. Jasmine took the stage, steady under the bright overhead lights. "Real strength," she said, her voice unwavering, "is staying human when the world tries to turn you into something less. Courage is refusing to let hatred define you." The room responded with quiet, powerful applause. Jasmine stepped back, letting others share their stories. Healing, slow but sure, had begun. Later, standing outside beneath the stars, Jasmine looked over the quiet city. The journey ahead would not be easy, but tonight proved that when courage met community, even the hardest walls could start to crack. She breathed in the cool night air, ready for whatever came next. If you witness injustice, will you stand up or will you bow your head? The choice is yours. Choose to stand. Choose to lead. If Jasmine's story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories. Your voice matters. Stay strong. Stay brave.